Hey guys, tonight we drift back into a Japan that hasn't decided what it wants to be yet, and you are standing in it barefoot, feeling the grit of a dirt road press into your skin as if it's already testing you. The air smells faintly of damp wood, old smoke, and rain that never quite finishes falling. Somewhere nearby, steel rings against steel, not in a heroic way, but in the casual, everyday way people argue when laws have collapsed and everyone carries a blade. You are born into this soundscape, into a country cracked open by the Sengoku period, when warlords feud like neighbors arguing over fence lines. It sounds romantic in hindsight. It is not. You probably won't survive this. Statistically speaking, you're already behind the curve. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your life sometime around 1584, give or take a year, because even your birthday is a little fuzzy. Historians still argue whether you were born in Harima province or somewhere nearby, which feels appropriate for a boy destined to live between certainties. Your given name is Shinmen Benosuke, later Takezo, and eventually Miyamoto Musashi, though none of those names matter much yet. Right now, you're just a child in a violent age, where the idea of a peaceful childhood is almost funny, in a dark, dry way. Japan at this moment is fractured into dozens of competing domains. Powerful families rule small territories. Samurai march under constantly changing banners. And allegiance is something you rent, not something you own. A mainstream historical fact that settles quietly into your life is that this era produces an unusual number of masterless warriors, men trained for war with nowhere stable to belong. These Ronin drift from place to place, sometimes teaching, sometimes fighting, sometimes starving. You watch them like weather systems, passing through without warning. Your father, or possibly your uncle, because historians still argue whether Munasai was one or the other, is a swordsman of some local reputation. He teaches the use of the jite, a blunt, forked weapon meant to trap blades, which is amusing in a time when everyone else just wants a longer sword. You grow up with weapons nearby, not as sacred objects, but as tools leaning against walls like farm equipment. The romantic samurai myth hasn't settled in yet. Steel is practical, not poetic. There's a quirky tidbit that floats through accounts of your childhood. You were described as wild, unruly, even unsightly. Some sources suggest you're physically neglected, roaming outdoors, hair uncombed, clothes torn. This may be exaggerated by later admirers trying to build a legend of the feral genius, but the theme sticks. You aren't polished. You aren't gentle. You don't learn manners first. You learn how to stay standing. You grow up watching adults die for reasons that feel thin even to a child. A banner changes color, a lord is replaced, and suddenly yesterday's ally is today's enemy. Sengoku Japan breeds a specific emotional tone, muted, practical, fatalistic. You absorb this tone early. It settles into your shoulders, into the way you stand slightly ready even when nothing seems wrong. When people later say you are unusually calm before violence, this is why. Calm is just the absence of surprise. There's debate, always debate, about how much formal training you receive early on. Historians still argue whether you studied at a traditional dojo as a child or learned almost everything through observation and self-practice. What everyone agrees on is that structure never fully claims you. Even as a boy, you resist being shaped too neatly. Instructions feel optional. Rules feel negotiable. You learn faster when no one tells you how. Your environment encourages this. Villages are small, loosely governed, and often poor. Food security wavers. You eat what's available, when it's available. This does something subtle to your relationship with comfort. You don't expect it. Years later, when you deliberately sleep outdoors and skip bathing, it won't be a dramatic act of self-denial. It will feel familiar, almost nostalgic, like wearing an old jacket. During your lifetime, hums beneath your childhood, Japan begins its slow march toward unification under figures like Toyotomi Hideyoshi and, later, Tokugawa Ieyasu. As a child, you don't know their names yet. You just feel the ripple effects, troop movements, rumors, the uneasy calm before another conflict. Big historical shifts always feel small when you're living inside them. You're sharp-eyed. You notice how fighters move before they strike, how their weight shifts, how impatience makes people sloppy. This isn't mystical intuition, it's boredom mixed with attention. You spend long stretches with nothing to do but watch adults rehearse violence, and so you memorize their errors. It's not a wholesome hobby, but it's effective. There's another odd detail that sometimes gets mentioned. You may have been sent to live at a temple for a while, possibly to be disciplined or educated. This is debated, like so much else. If it happened, it didn't tame you. Temples in this era are not just spiritual centers, they are political, sometimes militarized spaces. Even here, serenity coexists with threat. Chanting and steel share corridors. By the time you approach adolescence, the idea of destiny hasn't crossed your mind. You aren't dreaming of greatness, you're surviving, learning, collecting impressions like stones in your pockets. The popular narrative wants you to be a prodigy from the start. Reality is usually quieter. You're just a boy shaped by instability, already comfortable with risk, already slightly detached. There's a subtle emotional distance in you that people later mistake for fearlessness. It's not that you don't fear death, it's that death has never been abstract. You've seen it. It behaves predictably. This, oddly enough, makes it less distracting. As night settles over your childhood landscape, smoke rising from hearths and frogs calling from wet fields, you lie awake listening, not planning, not dreaming big, just listening. The land is loud with unrest. Somewhere, a future duel waits for you, though you don't know that yet. Right now, you're just breathing, absorbing, becoming the kind of person who will walk toward danger without ceremony. And in an age where chaos raises and breaks men daily, that quiet readiness is already the most dangerous thing about you. You don't ease into your first duel. You tumble into it like a stone thrown downhill, all momentum and bad judgment. Barely old enough to understand that consequences are not theoretical. You are around 13, maybe slightly younger, maybe slightly older, because even your age refuses to behave. What matters is that you are far too young to be standing across from an adult swordsman with real intent in his eyes. This is not a training bout. This is not ceremonial. This is the kind of encounter where the loser does not walk home thinking about personal growth. The man facing you is Arima Kihei, a wandering swordsman of the Shinto-ryu school. He has a reputation, which in this period is shorthand for has survived long enough to be noticed. He posts a challenge, a fairly common practice at the time, meant to draw in fighters and establish dominance. Normally, elders step in when a child gets ideas. Normally, someone tells you to go home. Somehow, no one does. A mainstream historical fact slides into place here. Dueling culture in late Sengoku Japan is fluid and dangerous, with few standardized rules. Challenges are public but loosely regulated. Skill matters, but timing, terrain, and sheer unpredictability matter just as much. You grow up absorbing this atmosphere, so when you accept the challenge, it doesn't feel outrageous. It feels available. There's an argument, of course there is, about whether you are formally challenged or whether you interrupt the duel without permission. Historians still argue whether your participation is sanctioned or impulsive. The truth is probably messier than the stories. You are young, aggressive, and convinced that hesitation is a flaw. You step forward before overthinking arrives. You don't bring a sword. That's the part people remember. You show up wielding a wooden staff, possibly a bokken, possibly just a rough piece of wood. This detail alone has generated endless commentary because it feels symbolic. The future master using a crude weapon, the underdog narrative already writing itself. The less romantic reality is that metal is expensive. Adults control access to it, and you use what you have. Your body feels strange as the duel begins. Not afraid exactly, more like overclocked. Your heart is loud in your ears, time misbehaves, and the world narrows until all you really see is weight distribution and distance. You notice Kihei's stance. You notice impatience aging his movements. You don't know technique names, you just know when something looks wrong. The duel is fast, shockingly fast. Accounts vary, but the consensus is brutal simplicity. You strike hard, repeatedly, overwhelming him before he can adapt. Some versions say you knock him down and beat him. Others say a single decisive blow ends it. There's no elegant exchange, no poetic symmetry, just a flurry of motion and then stillness. Here's the less glamorous part. You kill him. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. A man stops moving because you struck him. At 13-ish, not a rite of passage anyone sane would schedule. This is where sleepy history usually pauses out of politeness, but let's not pretend. You stand there afterward, chest heaving, wooden weapons slick with rain or sweat or worse, surrounded by adults who don't quite know what to say. There is no applause, there is no moral speech. There's just the sudden understanding that something irreversible has happened, and you are now part of it. A quirky tidbit floats here, often overlooked. Some tellings suggest that after the duel, local authorities or elders consider punishment. Others imply you flee almost immediately. The image of a triumphant boy strutting off into legend is probably fiction. It's more likely you leave because staying isn't safe or polite or sensible. Winning a duel doesn't mean winning social approval, especially when the winner is a child. And here's the psychological core of it. The duel works. That matters more than the ethics. From your perspective, stepping forward aggressively, refusing to hesitate, and overwhelming the enemy produces results. This is not a philosophy yet. It's a data point, filed away quietly. People later frame this moment as destiny announcing itself. In reality, it's messy and destabilizing. You don't suddenly feel enlightened, you feel changed. The adult world loses its theoretical quality. You now know, personally, that you can end a life. That knowledge doesn't make you monstrous, it makes you precise. There's debate, naturally, about whether this early victory warps you or clarifies you. Historians still argue whether killing so young pushes you toward isolation and asceticism later, or whether it merely accelerates tendencies already present. What's clear is that you don't cling to the event emotionally. You don't recount it fondly. You don't seek validation for it. If anything, you seem embarrassed by how crude it was. You don't linger. You begin moving. This might be the first true pattern of your life. Solve a problem decisively, then leave before it calcifies into reputation. Fame is sticky. You learn this early. People talk, especially when violence involves someone unexpected. Staying would mean being explained by others. You'd rather explain yourself through motion. As you travel, the land doesn't change its tone for you. Roads remain muddy. Inns remain suspicious. Food remains inconsistent. The only difference is internal. You walk with the quiet composure of someone who has already crossed a psychological threshold most adults actively avoid. You don't brag. You don't advertise. That restraint may be instinctive or may simply be exhaustion. There's a sleepy irony here. The duel that launches your legend does not feel legendary to you. It feels inefficient. Wooden weapon, uneven exchange, no finesse. If this is what combat is, you think, surely it can be done better. That thought, barely conscious, hardly articulated, will matter later. For now, you're still young. Too young, honestly, for the weight you're carrying. You sleep poorly, or deeply, accounts differ. But your dreams, if you have them, are probably not especially symbolic. You are practical even in rest. Somewhere along the road, you hear another challenge, another school, another swordsman. You don't rush toward it immediately this time. You walk, you watch. The lesson from your first duel is not "I am invincible." It is something quieter and far more dangerous. Acting without hesitation works. And once that settles into your bones, Undoing it takes a lifetime. The night settles around you, and for the first time, silence doesn't mean safety. It means possibility. Tomorrow, you may fight again, or you may not. Either way, you are no longer guessing who you are when steel or wood moves toward you. You already know. You don't look for teachers after your first duel. If anything, you drift away from them. Authority now feels like static, buzzing, present, but rarely useful. Instead, you move through the countryside like someone tuning an instrument by ear, adjusting yourself in response to whatever the land throws at you. There's no formal curriculum here. Your education is unstructured, repetitive, and frequently uncomfortable, which, unfortunately for your future opponents, turns out to be ideal. You walk for days at a time. Roads soften into footpaths, footpaths into nothing in particular. You sleep where you can, under eaves, in the lee of trees, sometimes in open fields where the stars look less romantic and more indifferent. Hunger becomes background noise. Not dramatic hunger, just a steady dullness that sharpens your attention. It's hard to be distracted when your body is running lean. A mainstream historical fact slides gently into this wandering phase. During the late Sengoku period, Japan has no centralized infrastructure for warrior training. Dojo exist, yes, but they are local, stylistic, and often politically entangled. A wanderer like you, young and unaffiliated, fits awkwardly into that ecosystem. Learning independently isn't rebellion, it's necessity. You begin training your body the way farmers train fields, consistently without flair. You lift stones simply because they are there. You swing sticks until your shoulders burn, then swing a little longer just to see what happens. Footwork becomes a private obsession. You practice stepping through uneven ground, adjusting balance without thinking, because real terrain never cooperates the way dojo floors do. If you trip, the earth doesn't apologize. There's something almost boring about how you approach improvement. No secret techniques, no mystical timing revelations, just repetition. When people later dress your skill in spiritual language, it likely annoys you. At this stage, everything feels mechanical. Cause, effect, refinement. You file away movement errors with the same disinterest you apply to bad weather. A quirky tidbit from this period suggests you practice striking trees repeatedly until bark peels and wood dents. This may be apocryphal, or it may simply be the only stationary object willing to tolerate your habits. Either way, it fits the pattern. Trees don't judge. They don't correct your form verbally. They just respond honestly to impact. You observe animals too, not in a poetic way, in a practical one. You notice how cats shift weight before pouncing, how birds commit fully to takeoff, or not at all. There's no half decision in efficient motion. This observation seeps into you quietly, without philosophy attached. Later, scholars will read symbolism into it. Right now, it's just pattern recognition. It's around this time that your reputation for being unpleasant begins to form. You don't bathe often. Sometimes that's choice, sometimes logistics. Water isn't always accessible. Time feels better spent moving. Your hair grows wild, your clothes remain unchanged longer than polite society would approve. But polite society rarely feeds you, so the trade feels fair. Historians still argue whether this neglect is intentional discipline or simple indifference. Some accounts frame it as deliberate asceticism, a rejection of vanity. Others suggest you simply don't care as long as it doesn't limit function. The truth is probably unromantic. Distraction is inefficient, and grooming feels optional when survival is not. Social skills do not develop evenly alongside your physical ones. Conversations bore you unless they carry useful information. Boasting irritates you. Ceremonial politeness feels like theater disguised as ethics. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you blunt in a culture that values subtlety. You don't soften edges automatically. When you occasionally encounter dojo masters or itinerant instructors, you watch first. You aren't impressed easily. Technique that relies on cooperative partners fails your internal tests. Movements that look elegant but crumble under resistance earn quiet dismissal. You don't challenge everyone. You challenge selectively. There's an ongoing scholarly debate, yes, another one, about how much formal schooling you secretly absorbed during this period. Historians still argue whether you studied certain school techniques closely enough to incorporate them, even if you never officially joined. What's clear is that your later style contains echoes of many traditions without belonging fully to any of them. You are a magpie, not a loyalist. You also begin to develop a strange relationship with time. You don't rush unless rushing serves purpose. You don't linger unless lingering yields insight. Waiting becomes a tool, not a gap. This will matter later, but right now it just means you're often slightly out of step with the normal rhythm of social life. You arrive early or late, rarely exactly when expected. You notice how other fighters prepare. Some stretch elaborately, psyching themselves up. Others crack jokes. You do neither. Preparation for you becomes internal. Breathing slows, muscles warm because you keep them warm naturally through constant movement. When the moment comes, you're already there. No switch flips, nothing dramatic happens. It's deeply underwhelming, which you find reassuring. Food remains inconsistent. You learn which plants are edible, which inns might offer work in exchange for a meal, which temples tolerate wanderers lingering near kitchens. There's a humility in this, though you'd never call it that. The ability to survive without dignity turns out to be a competitive advantage in a world obsessed with appearances. One quiet joke slips into your mindset somewhere along the road. The hungrier you are, the sharper you feel. This is not strictly true, but it feels true often enough to survive scrutiny. You joke to yourself that a full stomach dulls reaction time. It's the kind of logic only someone living like you would attempt. As years pass, not marked cleanly, just felt, you become harder to categorize. Too skilled to dismiss, too unpolished to easily respect. You exist in the cracks between schools, between classes, between expectations. This is lonely in a shallow way and freeing in a deeper one. By the time you reach adulthood, you are already someone difficult to teach and harder to predict. Not because you are mystical or volatile, but because you've built your foundation without external authority. Your movements belong to you. Your habits answer only to function. Under the night sky, muscles sore in a familiar way, you lie awake again. The world hasn't softened, neither have you. But something has taken shape, slowly, quietly, without instruction. A method forged by neglect, patience, and repetition. And whether history praises or criticizes that method later, it will work. By the time you reach Kyoto, the city doesn't greet you so much as evaluate you. Kyoto has a way of doing that. Eyes sliding over your posture, your hands, the quiet confidence that doesn't ask permission. This is the old capital, still heavy with prestige, even as political power has begun drifting elsewhere. Temples lean into the streets like they've overheard everything. Dojo signs hang with understated arrogance. Everyone here knows something about violence, but they prefer not to talk about it unless absolutely necessary. You arrive dusty, underfed, and unconcerned with appearances, which immediately puts you at odds with a city built on refinement. Kyoto values lineage, polish, and reputation. You have none of these in visible supply. What you do have is ability, humming quietly beneath the surface, like a blade still in its sheath. The mainstream historical fact settles in. The Yoshioka school is one of the most respected sword schools in Kyoto at this time. Their reputation is old, carefully maintained, and deeply intertwined with the city's cultural pride. They teach not just technique, but decorum, how to look like a master as much as how to fight like one. Challenging them is not mildly rude, it's architectural vandalism. And yet, somehow, that's exactly where you drift. There are several versions of how this begins. Historians still argue whether you formally challenge the Yoshioka or whether a series of insults, misunderstandings, and mutual testing escalates into conflict. What seems consistent is that you do not approach with theatrical respect. You do not flatter. You do not play the role of the eager student. You behave like someone assessing a tool, not a tradition. Your first encounter is with Yoshioka Seijuro. He is younger, technically gifted, and very aware of the weight his name carries. The duel is arranged. The setting is appropriate. Spectators gather quietly, all of them expecting the outcome they've rehearsed internally. Outsiders do not upend institutions. That's not how Kyoto works. You arrive late. Not dramatically late, just inconveniently so. Enough to irritate. Enough to disrupt the opponent's mental preparation. This habit, intentional or not, has already woven itself into your life. You don't rush to fit other people's schedules, especially when those schedules are built to give them comfort. When the duel begins, it's quick and unsettling. Your movements are economical, almost rude in their lack of flourish. Seijuro strikes with proper form. You strike to end the exchange. The fight does not last long enough for the audience to find its emotional footing. Seijuro is defeated, wounded, alive, but publicly undone. The city exhales sharply. A quirky tidbit lingers here. Some accounts claim you use a wooden sword again, even when steel would have been appropriate. Whether true or not, the detail circulates because it annoys people. Wood feels dismissive, as if you're saying, "This is enough." And in Kyoto, where subtle symbols carry enormous weight, that suggestion lands poorly. You leave again. Of course you do. Victory doesn't anchor you, it repels you. Reputation gathers where you stop moving, so you keep going. But Kyoto is smaller socially than geographically. News chases faster than feet, and the Yoshioka do not fade quietly. Soon, another duel is proposed. This time with Yoshioka Denshichiro, the head of the family. Older, more established, less flexible. This duel carries expectations heavy enough to bow floors. You agree, because refusing would tangle you in politics, and you have no interest in that particular art. Once again, you arrive late. By now, people are noticing the pattern. Some think it's arrogance. Others think it's strategy. Historians still argue whether your lateness is psychological warfare or simply indifference to ceremony. As with many things about you, intention is less important than effect. The duel ends decisively. Denshichiro is killed. This time, the silence afterward is different. He was not just a swordsman, he was an institution. With that death, your status in Kyoto mutates. You are no longer an interesting outsider. You are a threat to stability. Tradition does not appreciate being audited. There's a practical shift now. You stop being treated like a challenger and start being treated like a problem. The Yoshioka school, wounded twice, responds not with philosophy, but with logistics. Ambush replaces honor. Numbers replace individual skill. Kyoto's genteel surface cracks just enough to show how power actually operates under stress. At this point, even sympathetic chroniclers can't romanticize everything. What follows is messy. There are reports of you fighting multiple attackers, possibly younger students sent to overwhelm you. Some stories inflate the numbers absurdly. Others reduce them conservatively. Historians still argue whether the most dramatic versions reflect truth or posthumous myth-making. What's widely accepted is this: you survive. Not because the Yoshioka lacks skill, but because your approach doesn't rely on their assumptions. You arrive early this time. You choose terrain carefully. You disengage when it serves you. There is nothing ceremonially satisfying about how you fight. It works anyway. Here's the non-heroic insight that emerges from Kyoto. Institutions are predictable. They value patterns. They expect behavior to follow tradition. You don't. This doesn't make you morally superior. It makes you difficult to counter. Emotionally, Kyoto leaves a residue. You don't express it, but something settles deeper. Challenging a school feels empty. Breaking lineage accomplishes nothing that matters to you. You didn't defeat ideas, just people operating inside them. The distinction matters more than it sounds. As you leave Kyoto behind, again dusty, again unadorned, there's no sense of triumph. If anything, there's mild irritation. The strongest resistance you faced came not from technique, but from coordination and expectation. This nudges your thinking quietly, reshaping priorities. Later in life, when you write about strategy transcending individual skill, this experience will whisper from between the lines. Right now, it's just a lesson learned the hard way. Tradition is heavy, but heavy things fall awkwardly. Kyoto recedes behind you, resuming its rituals, repairing its dignity. You move on, not chased, but not welcomed back either. In a city obsessed with heritage, you have left behind disruption rather than belonging. And somehow, that suits you perfectly. After Kyoto, something clarifies inside you, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with the quiet certainty of a decision already half made. You don't just become a Ronin because circumstances force it, you choose it. Loyalty, in theory, offers shelter, steady meals, a name to stand under. In practice, it also asks for alignment, obedience, and time spent polishing someone else's legacy. You've tasted what it feels like to move without permission, and the idea of giving that up feels heavier than hunger. So, you keep walking. This is not as unusual as later stories make it seem. A mainstream historical fact settles here. The late Sengoku to early Edo transition produces thousands of masterless samurai. Some lose lords in battle, others drift between employers. Some, like you, never commit at all. The image of the Ronin as tragic outsider comes later. At the time, it's an unstable but viable category. You sleep where you can, work when it's efficient, fight when it's unavoidable. You begin to understand how much freedom costs in small daily payments. No one calls your name in greetings because no one knows it well enough. You eat irregularly. You own very little, but you also answer to no one's timetable. There's a difference between solitude and isolation, and you lean into the former deliberately. You speak less, listen more. People misinterpret this as hostility or arrogance. You don't correct them. Explanation is rarely worth the energy. Your social circle narrows to functional interactions. A meal negotiated, directions exchanged, a duel arranged. A quirky tidbit surfaces in some accounts. You turn down offers of service, sometimes abruptly. Not grand offers from famous lords, those may never reach you, but small ones. Guard work, instruction, modest retainers' roles, stable, respectable paths. You decline them with the same indifference you'd refuse a second bowl of food when you're already full. Not because the work offends you, but because you don't want the shape it would give your days. Historians still argue whether these refusals reflect arrogance, mistrust of authority, or a deeper philosophical impulse. The truth may be simpler. You are learning fastest this way. Attachment would slow the process. Stability carries invisible routines, and routines dull edges if you're not careful. Your sense of identity loosens during this period. Names matter less. Lineage matters less. You introduce yourself sparingly, sometimes inconsistently. The core of you retreats inward, where it can't be negotiated away. This inward focus will later be mistaken for mysticism. Right now, it's logistical. You encounter other Ronin, of course. Some are bitter, carrying unresolved loyalty like an open wound. Some brag loudly about past wars. Some cling to outdated techniques as if repetition might restore relevance. You learn from them too, mostly what not to become. At night, you lie awake and review encounters, not emotionally, but structurally. What worked, what failed, what surprised you. These reviews are calm, almost tedious. There's no self-congratulation. Improvement is assumed, not celebrated. Victory simply means the lesson arrived intact. It's around this time that you begin to view duels as labor rather than drama, A task appears, you assess it, you complete it. This outlook makes you oddly resilient under pressure. Other fighters carry expectations into combat, honor, validation, fear. You carry none of that. For you, the duel ends when the problem ends. Your body adapts to the lifestyle in quiet ways. You move efficiently because inefficiency is uncomfortable. You eat enough to function, not to indulge. Muscles settle into a durable shape instead of a decorative one. You age without ornament. People later describe you as homely or severe. That seems fair. There's debate, endless debate, about when you fully articulate your philosophy of independence. Historians still argue whether these ideas form early or only later, crystallized by reflection and writing. What's likely is that the philosophy comes after the habits. You live the principle before you name it. You start to notice how people react when you refuse alignment. They are confused, some are offended. In a society built around hierarchy and obligation, your choices feel like critique, even when none is intended. You aren't trying to reject values, you're trying to preserve clarity. One quiet joke develops in your mind. Belonging always costs more than advertised. The price isn't obvious at first, just small compromises. A duel fought to please a superior. A technique maintained to honor a school rather than its effectiveness. You'd rather pay the upfront cost of hunger than the compound interest of expectation. Occasionally, loneliness flickers, not as sadness, but as awareness. You notice fires burning in village hearths and keep moving. You hear laughter from inns and continue down the road. These moments register, then fade. You aren't immune to connection, you're selective. Your reputation grows anyway, annoyingly independent of your efforts. Stories travel faster than footsteps. You hear them refracted back at you, exaggerated, sanitized, distorted. You are calmer than the stories, less impressive, more practical. That gap starts to bother you, not from ego, but from inaccuracy. As you move from province to province, Japan itself begins to steady politically. Larger powers subsume smaller ones. Peace looms faintly, like weather on the horizon. For many warriors, this spells irrelevance. For you, it creates space. When chaos recedes, clarity matters more. You don't articulate it yet, but a quiet question has settled in. What is strength for, if not for employment? This is not a crisis, it's a background hum. Keep walking. Keep choosing freedom in 1,000 tiny moments. By the time the sun sets behind you on another nameless road, carrying dust and unsent attachment, you are fully, unmistakably a Ronin, not by loss, but by intention. And intention, you are learning, is harder to dislodge than circumstance. At some point, without a clear border or ceremony, duels stop feeling like events and start feeling like errands. You don't wake up trembling with anticipation. You wake up, stretch stiff muscles, and register the possibility of violence the way other people register weather. It might happen today, it might not. Either way, you'll adjust. This shift is subtle but important. A mainstream historical fact settles into the background during your lifetime. Dueling culture shifts from chaotic, informal challenges toward more regulated, symbolic forms as Japan stabilizes. But you operate in the overlap, where danger is still real, but repetition has drained it of novelty. You are not chasing glory, you're testing conditions. People seek you out now, sometimes politely, sometimes foolishly, sometimes because they want to check whether the stories are true. They usually approach confident, rehearsed, emotionally invested. You meet them calm, slightly tired, and already thinking about foot placement. There's a particular boredom that creeps in. Not contempt, just familiarity. Most fighters repeat themselves. They favor one opening, one rhythm, one convincing illusion of adaptability. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Combat becomes less about reflex and more about waiting for the inevitable. This is where your habits look strange to outsiders. You show up late again. Not always, but often. You don't rush into readiness. Sometimes you appear almost indifferent, leaning on a staff, gaze drifting. This irritates opponents terribly. They expect ceremony, tension, ceremony again. You give them pause. Historians still argue whether this indifference is strategic affectation or genuine disinterest. The line blurs. What begins as real lack of concern becomes useful. Anxiety moves faster than aggression, and you let opponents exhaust themselves into mistakes. A quirky tidbit floats around from this period. You sometimes eat or nap shortly before duels. This detail horrifies traditionalists and delights later storytellers. How could a warrior be so casual? The honest answer is simple. Performance improves when your body isn't cluttered by anticipation. You just want to be comfortable. The actual fights rarely match later retellings. They are brief, unglamorous, decided by timing more than strength. You don't trade blows if you can end things sooner. You don't linger in finishing movements. Once the outcome is clear, you disengage physically and mentally. Drama requires participation. You decline. There's an emotional flattening here that's easy to misread. You don't celebrate victories. You don't sulk over defeats, though there are few recorded. You treat outcomes as information. If something works, you file it. If it fails, you revise. Pride doesn't factor heavily into the process. This is also the era where your internal language sharpens. You begin categorizing people not as brave or cowardly, but as hurried or patient. Most are hurried. They want something decided quickly. Status, validation, fear relief. You're willing to wait. Waiting, you've discovered, is an edge most people surrender freely. There's debate, of course, about how emotionally detached you truly are. Historians still argue whether your writing later reflects innate stoicism or learned suppression. From inside your experience, it doesn't feel like suppression. It feels like clarity. Excess emotion feels like fog. You prefer clear air. Occasionally, a duel surprises you. An opponent adapts faster than expected. Footwork changes mid-exchange. That rare moment lights something awake in you. Focus sharpens instantly. These are the fights you remember afterward, not fondly, but respectfully. They prove the system still works because it still encounters variables. And then there are the dull ones, the ones where your opponent overcommits, slips, panics. You end those quickly, not out of cruelty, but efficiency. Lingering doesn't honor anyone. A quiet joke lives here too. If everyone trained less for victory and more to avoid embarrassment, duels would last longer. The thought amuses you briefly, then disappears. Humor in your mind is fleeting, private, and rarely shared. Your body begins to show wear, not dramatic scars, but accumulated fatigue. Wrists ache, joints complain in the cold. You adjust technique accordingly, favoring alignment over force. This adaptation becomes habit, then doctrine. Later, when you advocate conserving energy and choosing efficiency, it won't be theory, it will be joint memory. As duels stack and blur, you begin questioning the structure of constant testing. Winning proves you can win. That stops being interesting surprisingly quickly. Repetition teaches diminishing returns. You begin to look for encounters that reveal something new, not about others, but about yourself. Japan, meanwhile, keeps steadying. Roads improve, banditry decreases, lords consolidate power. The constant edge that made wandering necessary begins to soften. For many fighters, this signals the end of relevance. For you, it signals a transition. You don't stop dueling immediately. Habits fade slowly, but the emotional draw weakens. You begin thinking about combat less as confrontation and more as study. The opponent matters less than the principle illustrated. At night, lying under unfamiliar roofs or open sky, you review fewer fights in detail. Instead, you think about structure, why certain timings destabilize others, why hesitation spreads like infection. These reflections feel different, broader, less urgent. Somewhere in this blur of roads and resolved conflict, a realization takes shape, not crisply, but persistently. Fighting people is not the same as study in combat. The former confirms ability. The latter deepens understanding. And understanding, you're beginning to suspect, will outlast muscle. As sleep takes you, there's no adrenaline left to burn, just quiet limbs, calm breath, and the faint sense that the most important work ahead may not involve another duel at all. You don't invent the two-sword style in a single flash of insight. There's no dramatic moment where lightning strikes and you declare yourself different. It emerges the way most durable ideas do, slowly, through irritation. One sword begins to feel limiting. Not wrong, just narrow. You notice how often the unused hand has nothing meaningful to do, hovering, uncommitted, like a wasted thought. At first, you experiment casually. A short blade in the offhand, a stick, anything that lets you interfere with space rather than simply occupy it. It feels awkward, your muscles complain, your timing unravels. The body hates asymmetry at first. Traditionalists take this discomfort as proof of failure. You take it as data. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly. While some samurai train with multiple weapons, simultaneous dual wielding with katana and wakizashi is not common doctrine. Schools emphasize decisive single strike forms and clear lines of authority. Two swords confuse both, and anything that confuses tradition draws scrutiny. You practice alone mostly. Trees become stand-ins for opponents again. You measure reach differently now, not just linear distance, but lateral control. One blade occupies attention, the other creates consequence. The coordination demands are high. Your brain overheats early on. You persist anyway. There's a quirky tidbit from this period that occasionally surfaces. You are said to have practiced holding one sword while throwing stones with the other hand to simulate divided attention. Whether literal or legend, the principle fits. You are training not technique alone, but cognitive load. Most fighters collapse under too many variables. You want to expand that tolerance deliberately. People mock the idea when they hear of it. Two swords look theatrical, excessive, hard to defend philosophically. You don't defend it. Defense invites debate. You demonstrate only when necessary, and even then, without explanation. Your balance shifts. Footwork line widens slightly. You stop committing fully to single, clean lines. Instead, you learn to threaten without finishing. This destabilizes opponents. They want closure. You offer potential. Potential makes people rush. Historians still argue whether your dual sword style is central to your success or merely supplemental. Some claim its importance is overblown by later admirers hungry for novelty. Others argue it fundamentally alters engagement dynamics. From inside your experience, it's simpler. Two swords make certain things easier and others harder. Convenience, not mysticism, drives the choice. Your left hand, once secondary, becomes competent. Movements distribute more evenly across your body. Fatigue spreads instead of concentrating. Injuries recover better when stress isn't localized. This is not philosophy yet. It's injury management, learned the hard way. You begin to notice how enemies freeze when confronted with unfamiliar structures. Their training doesn't give them quick answers. In that pause, sometimes less than a second, you act. Not extravagantly, just punctually. A gentle joke enters your thoughts. People spend years perfecting balance, then get confused when balance looks unfamiliar. The amusement is brief. Humor, for you, exists mostly as internal punctuation. There's an open scholarly debate, of course there is, of disrespecting lineage. Some say you compensate for flawed basics with tricks. You consider explaining that your basics work fine, they're just not decorative. You decide against it. Arguments consume time better spent practicing. There's an open scholarly debate, of course there is, about whether your two-sword method is truly systematized during this period or whether it only coalesces later in writing. Historians still argue whether you consciously develop a school or simply act pragmatically until theory catches up. Based on your behavior, the latter feels more honest. You don't teach the style widely. That surprises people. If this method is effective, why not spread it? The answer is quiet. Most people don't want effectiveness at the cost of discomfort. Two swords require patience, coordination, and abandoning aesthetic comfort. That's a tall order. You adjust your equipment accordingly. Blade length shortens sometimes. Grip changes subtly. You adapt weapon choice to context instead of forcing context to honor the weapon. Traditional trends rarely survive your personal testing phase. Emotionally, the style aligns with your personality. You dislike singular commitments. One sword feels like overinvestment. Two allow flexibility, control, options. This doesn't make you indecisive, it makes you adaptable. Fights become even more asymmetrical now. Opponents trained for clean exchanges flounder when angles multiply. You don't dominate them with speed, you deny them structure. Once structure dissolves, most people supply panic. You notice how spectators react. Confusion first, then discomfort, then retroactive outrage. Innovation is rarely welcomed politely. You accept this with indifference. Approval was never the goal. Later, when you formalize the concept as Niten Ichiru, the school of two heavens as one, people will search for spiritual meaning in the name. You will mean coordination, unity without sacrifice of function, two efforts moving together without collision. As the days pass, this method becomes less experimental and more instinctive. Your hands stop arguing with each other. One watches, one acts. Roles switch fluidly. The boundary between leading and supporting dissolves. In the quiet moments after a spar or duel, you notice something unexpectedly calming. Using two swords occupies the mind completely. There's less room for stray thought, for ego, for anxiety. Presence becomes mandatory. This mental stillness feels useful. You don't yet articulate it, but you are building towards something beyond technique, a way of engaging complexity without flinching. Two swords are just the training apparatus. Under the open sky again, arms resting, breath even, you roll this awareness gently through your mind, not as theory, as lived sensation. Balance doesn't mean symmetry. Sometimes it means staying upright while holding more than one thing at once. Over time, isolation stops being something you endure and becomes something you cultivate, not in a dramatic monk on a mountain way, more like careful pruning. You remove what doesn't add anything useful. Conversations thin out. Social obligations quietly evaporate. Hygiene drifts further down the priority list, not as rebellion, but as indifference. Cleanliness, you decide, is only valuable when it affects performance, and most of the time, it doesn't. You travel alone by default now. Companions slow your pace, introduce negotiation into decisions you'd rather make once. Solitude lets your thoughts stretch out without interruption. The world feels sharper when nothing competes for attention. Sounds arrive undiluted. Choices present themselves plainly. A mainstream historical fact settles here. Solitary wandering among warriors in early Edo Japan is not uncommon, but extended voluntary isolation is notable. Most Ronin eventually seek affiliation for survival. You do the opposite. You reduce dependence deliberately, trimming your life down to movement, practice, and rest. Your appearance becomes a talking point wherever you pass. Hair untended, clothing worn beyond acceptable cycles of repair. The smell, let's be honest, sometimes precedes you. Later admirers will try to spin this into spiritual asceticism. In reality, bathing requires time, privacy, and clean water. You'd rather sharpen observation. There's a quirky tidbit often mentioned with a mix of horror and fascination. You are said to have intentionally avoided bathing to remain acclimated to discomfort. Whether fully intentional or simply habitual, the result is the same. You become comfortable being uncomfortable. This irritates people who treat discipline as performance rather than condition. Historians still argue whether this physical neglect is philosophical or practical. Some frame it as Zen-aligned detachment. Others suggest land-bound logistics and constant travel made grooming unrealistic. Likely both. You accept inconvenience without commentary. That alone feels quietly radical. Your days take on a predictable rhythm, and that predictability calms you. You wake early, you move, you practice, you eat when possible, you rest when necessary. There's little self-indulgence, but also little self-denial. Everything exists in service to awareness. This isolation does something else subtle. It removes mirrors. Without people constantly reacting to you, there's no feedback loop to reinforce identity. You stop thinking of yourself as impressive or unimpressive. You simply operate. Ego has fewer surfaces to reflect off of. You also notice how rarely people can be still. When you sit quietly, doing nothing visible, passers-by grow uneasy. Stillness reads as threat or judgment. You're not threatening anyone, but you let the discomfort linger. It teaches you something about pressure. Silence applies it more efficiently than force. Your focus sharpens unusually during this period. Thoughts come one at a time instead of overlapping. You find yourself able to hold complex scenarios in mind without strain. Distances, angles, contingencies. This mental quiet feels earned, not mystical. Fewer inputs mean cleaner processing. There's an ongoing scholarly debate, because of course there is, about when Zen Buddhism meaningfully influences you. Historians still argue whether you formally study Zen during this phase or simply converge on similar practices through personal discipline. From inside the experience, labels barely matter. You're not chasing enlightenment, you're chasing clarity. Occasionally, the isolation strains you. You catch yourself talking aloud, not from madness, but from lack of conversational outlet. The sound of your own voice startles you sometimes. You laugh once at yourself for this, quietly. That laugh echoes oddly in empty space, and you file it away as information. Your physical condition reflects your lifestyle. Lean, sinewy, durable rather than powerful. You stop training excessively for strength. Control and endurance matter more. You treat your body like a tool that must function consistently under neglect. There's a sort of private joke you entertain now and then. Everyone wants to look like a warrior, but no one wants to live like one. The humor isn't cruel, it's observational. Armor and titles are clean, reality isn't. You notice that fear behaves differently around you now. Animals pause, people hesitate. It's not intimidation so much as unreadability. You've removed enough signals that others can't predict response. Uncertainty unsettles them. You don't exploit this consciously, but you don't correct it either. At night, you often sit awake longer than needed. Not restless, attentive. You listen to insects, to wind through leaves, to distant human noise dissolving into background. Your breath slows without instruction. Stillness grows more accessible, like a room you finally learned how to enter. This quiet doesn't make you gentle, it makes you precise. When action is required, you act without buildup. No rehearsal, no emotional ramp, just movement. People mistake this for lack of feeling. It's more like lack of friction. As the years pass, isolation stops feeling lonely. It starts feeling protected. A space where thought can move without obstruction, where purpose doesn't have to announce itself loudly to exist. Lying down at the end of another day, clothes stiff with use, body settled into fatigue, you realize something with mild surprise. You are calmer now than when you started wandering. Not happier, calmer. The difference matters. In a noisy world rediscovering order, you've built a quiet one of your own. It's not comfortable, it is effective. And effectiveness, for you, has always been the point. At some point, you begin winning fights you don't even attend. This isn't magic, it's scheduling. You stop treating duels as obligations and start treating them as optional meetings. If the time doesn't suit you, you don't show up. If the location feels wrong, you don't go. If the premise itself seems pointless, you let silence answer on your behalf. This irritates people more than defeat ever did. A mainstream historical fact slides neatly into place here. Honor culture in early Edo Japan depends heavily on participation. Reputation thrives on response. To ignore a challenge is often considered worse than losing. You discover this by accident at first, then recognize its usefulness. Refusal destabilizes systems built on reaction. You don't frame this as avoidance, you simply don't see why another person's need for validation should set your schedule. Survival taught you independence, mastery taught you selectivity. There are stories, some likely true, others embellished, of you deliberately arriving late or not at all, allowing challengers to exhaust themselves emotionally before the encounter even begins. They wait, they imagine, they rehearse. When nothing happens, momentum collapses inward. By the time you appear, or don't, the contest has already tilted. A quirky tidbit from this period claims you once sent word declining a duel because the weather felt wrong. This could be metaphor or invention, but it aligns with your logic. Conditions matter. Fighting in a way that flatters the opponent's expectations rarely benefits you. Historians still argue whether these absences demonstrate superior strategy or social disregard. Some interpret them as psychological warfare. Others see laziness or arrogance. From the inside of it, the choice feels neutral. You are conserving attention. Attention is finite. You spend it where learning occurs. Physical confrontations begin thinning out, not disappearing, just spacing farther apart. You no longer accept challenges as default tests. You seek encounters that reveal something new about terrain, timing, or human behavior. Without novelty, you decline. This refusal changes your relationship with fear. People expect fighters to crave confrontation. By not craving it, you remove one of their levers. Threats lose weight when they aren't answered immediately. Aggression, it turns out, needs an audience. There's a quiet pleasure in this realization, not joy exactly, more like neatness. Problems simplify when you don't engage emotionally. Many conflicts resolve themselves when unattended, like knots loosening when handled less. Some nights, you reflect on opponents you never met, men who trained, traveled, waited, and then returned home unchanged because you didn't validate the effort. You don't feel guilty. You also don't feel triumphant. Their internal narratives simply didn't intersect with yours. A subtle internal shift happens here. You begin valuing absence as a tactic, not cowardice, absence as presence elsewhere, control by subtraction. You remove yourself from equations that don't interest you, and the system reorganizes without your input. Historians still argue whether this phase marks the beginning of your philosophical maturity. Did you stop fighting because you transcended it, or because circumstance changed? Probably both. Japan itself is settling. As peace inches closer, the social appetite for duels shrinks. You adapt faster than most. You also become aware of how stories distort when you aren't there to correct them. Rumors inflate. Motives are assigned. Mystique grows accidentally. You consider addressing it, then decide against it. Mystery doesn't demand maintenance. There's a mild joke that floats through your mind. Sometimes the best way to win is to let the other person construct the entire battlefield in their head. You never say this aloud. It feels obvious once noticed. Your physical presence becomes rarer but more deliberate. When you do fight, it's because you choose to, not because someone else insists. This choice reduces anxiety even before conflict. Agency is calming. There's still danger, of course. Avoiding unnecessary engagements doesn't eliminate risk. But you assess risk differently now. You factor in emotional cost, narrative drain, and long-term distraction. Combat is no longer central. It's ancillary. Curiously, some people respect you more for refusing than for winning. Others despise you. Both reactions confirm the same principle. Expectation is a tool most people hand over willingly. You don't. At night, wrapped in stillness, you think less about opponents and more about structure. How systems compel behavior. How rituals trap participants into predictable loops. Duels, honor, challenge, they all rely on mutual participation. Remove one actor and the play stalls. There's an ongoing scholarly debate, yes, another one, about whether your reputation for avoidance is overstated by later writers eager to frame you as a philosopher warrior rather than a brawler. Historians still argue about the frequency of your later duels. The truth likely sits quietly between extremes. What matters is what changes inside you. You are no longer proving anything. The hunger to test fades. A deeper curiosity takes its place. How conflict operates at scale, how it dissolves, how it can be redirected or neutralized without impact. As sleep approaches, thoughts lengthen and soften. You don't rehearse fights anymore. You rehearse absence. You imagine stepping aside, letting momentum pass, feeling the calm of non-engagement. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you efficient. And in a world just beginning to value order over valor, you're once again slightly ahead of your time by simply not showing up where others insist you must. You wake to the soft whisper of wind threading through the bamboo grove, the scent of damp earth curling into your senses. This morning feels unusually crisp, the kind that nudges you gently into alertness without the harshness of city smoke or the clang of a metal bell. You stretch, feeling the pull along your back and shoulders, and realize that the rhythm of your muscles, honed over years of practice, has a memory of its own. Today, you're heading toward a new encounter, a duel perhaps, or merely an observation that will teach you something subtle about timing and presence. You can't quite know yet, and maybe that's for the best. After all, unpredictability is half the fun of living as Miyamoto Musashi. As you gather your gear, the weight of your bokken feels familiar and comforting. It's smooth, worn by practice, and polished by the rituals of countless mornings just like this. You sling it over your shoulder, noting the way sunlight kisses the grain of the wood, glinting like a faint smile in passing. Historians still argue whether Musashi's obsession with refining his weaponry was purely practical or had a meditative undertone, but you feel it in your fingertips either way. You run your fingers over the hilt and feel the whisper of discipline it carries, a silent invitation to move, to breathe, to align your body with something larger than the morning itself. Your path today takes you along a small river. Water trickles over rocks, shaping them slowly, persistently, like time shaping you without you noticing. You hear a frog croak somewhere nearby and pause, listening to the tiny ecosystem holding its quiet negotiations. You remember a tale of Musashi catching a fish with his bare hands, a story that seems slightly exaggerated, but you can't help smiling at the idea. There's a fringe theory suggesting that Musashi sometimes practiced catching live animals for both skill and meditation, a curious method to test patience, reflexes, and presence all at once. You shake your head lightly, amused, imagining modern scholars debating whether that was an eccentricity or an enlightened exercise in mindfulness. As you approach the riverbank, you notice the glint of sunlight on the water surface, reflecting fragmented patterns that make you squint lazily. You sit on a smooth stone, the cold of the river just enough to remind you of the world beyond your own body. The river sings its tiny, constant song while you take a deep breath and survey the path ahead. Today, like many days in your wandering life, is a study in observation. You watch a bird dive and emerge with a small fish, feathers slick and determined, a miniature dance of precision and patience. You could learn a lesson here if only you let the river and its creatures speak their quiet truths. You continue walking, the soil yielding slightly under your feet, each step echoing against the ancient trees around you. The air carries a faint scent of smoke from distant homes, mingling oddly with the sweetness of pine sap and wildflowers. You notice how your senses expand when you allow them to, the way distant chatter of villagers, the low hum of insects, and the occasional splash of water merge into a meditative rhythm. You probably won't survive an actual battle if you rely solely on instinct and calm, but that's not your goal today. You are here to learn, to refine, to feel the world in slow motion while carrying centuries of technique inside you like a quiet companion. Later, you find a clearing. It's small, unremarkable to most, but it holds a certain clarity, a neutral stage where lessons unfold naturally. You take a deep breath, feeling the pulse of your heartbeat align with the soft swish of leaves in the wind. Here, you set your bokken down gently, the wooden sound muted by the brass below. You draw your first practice swing and feel the subtle interplay of balance, momentum, and intent. There's a fringe theory that Musashi sometimes practiced with invisible opponents, imagining duels against shadows, a sort of mental chess with movement and timing. You try it, letting the air itself become a partner, noting how your mind sharpens when there's no threat, only potential. Hours drift quietly by as you experiment with stances, swings, and shifts in weight. You notice small things, the resistance of the soil beneath your feet, the way your shoulder muscles respond differently depending on posture, the faint chill that travels along your spine when a breeze passes. This is the rhythm you chase in life, not dramatic clashes, but micro-victories in awareness. You take a moment to sit again, wiping sweat from your brow and feeling a deep, satisfying fatigue in your limbs. You think about how Musashi's duels were sometimes over in moments and sometimes dragged painfully, yet each required the same core of presence and observation. You imagine historians still arguing whether his greatest victories were in combat or in these silent moments of preparation, and you chuckle quietly. Let them debate while you feel the river and wind, unbothered. As the afternoon drifts toward evening, you rise, collecting your bokken and adjusting your simple attire. You notice the sun lowering behind the distant hills, casting long, soft shadows across the terrain. You remember stories of Musashi traveling in disguise, unnoticed, blending with crowds and landscapes, absorbing technique from the world around him. There's a subtle lesson here. Observation is everywhere if you let yourself see without expectation. You trudge along the path back to the small village, hearing the distant clang of a blacksmith and the soft murmur of life continuing in quiet persistence. You feel a gentle satisfaction, a reminder that mastery is often invisible, lived in small, consistent steps rather than grand gestures. Finally, night begins to settle, and the stars emerge timidly over the horizon. You pause, tilting your head to the heavens, feeling the expanse of sky and the humbling smallness of human endeavor. Yet within you, there's a steady, deliberate calm. Tonight, you rest knowing that even in stillness, you have moved closer to understanding, not just of swordsmanship, but of life itself, the quiet dance of observation, patience, and presence. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen you read about last week? Strange, yes, but it reminds you that history is full of unexpected solutions, just as your own life, wandering and quiet, is full of subtle lessons. You lay down on the soft grass, feeling the day's exertion slowly dissolve into comfort. Your eyes trace the silhouette of trees against the starlit sky, and your mind drifts, unhurried, unpressured. You breathe, letting each inhale and exhale remind you that there is no rush, no urgent battle demanding your attention. Just this night, this quiet, this simple continuation of a life lived attentively. You close your eyes with a gentle smile, the echo of your practice swings lingering in your muscles, a soft lullaby for the body and mind. You wake to the subtle shift of dawn spilling pale light across the tatami, the air slightly cooler than yesterday, carrying a faint aroma of smoke from distant hearths. Your body moves almost automatically, a reflection of years spent in disciplined routines. Yet today, there is a softness in the motions, as if the day itself encourages a slower pace. You stand, stretching arms toward the ceiling beams, feeling each vertebra articulate like a gently opening book. There is a quiet satisfaction in these small bodily awakenings, the kind that reminds you how fully living in the present can feel, even when you are alone on a narrow path of wandering. So, you gather your belongings, secure your bokken, and step out into the morning haze, letting your senses attune to the subtle symphony around you. The path winds through a grove of pine and cedar, the morning dew leaving faint impressions on your sandals. Birds begin their sporadic calls, some flitting close enough for you to see the shimmer of their feathers. You recall a historical note that Musashi once preferred to travel lightly, rarely carrying unnecessary provisions, relying instead on acute observation and adaptability. There is debate among scholars still about how much of Musashi's legendary minimalism was practical necessity versus cultivated philosophy. Either way, you feel the logic in it. Less burden on your shoulders allows more attention to the world itself. The tiny lessons hidden in the rustle of leaves, the flash of movement, or the subtle texture of the earth underfoot. A small village emerges through the mist, smoke curling from chimneys and children's laughter drifting faintly across the rice paddies. You walk alongside the fields, careful not to startle the laborers, observing their rhythms. There is a fringe tale that Musashi sometimes exchanged lessons for food or lodging rather than gold, teaching in whispers and demonstrations, a kind of understated barter system. You smile quietly at the thought, imagining yourself offering a single, precise stroke of the bokken as currency, the motion measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. It makes you think about the balance between giving and receiving, a quiet principle that echoes across centuries. You notice a low wooden bridge spanning a slow-moving stream. Stepping carefully, you feel the slight sway beneath your feet and pause, sensing the water's gentle insistence below. The surface ripples, catching reflections of clouds, trees, and yourself in fleeting, distorted fragments. You remember reading that Musashi often considered natural landscapes part of his training. The unpredictability of a river, the unevenness of terrain, even the unpredictability of weather as instructors in balance, timing, and decision-making. Historians still argue whether his environmental awareness was purely practical or part of a deeper philosophical system akin to Zen principles. Either way, you let your gaze follow the stream, absorbing lessons not in words, but in perception. As you continue, you enter a small forest clearing where sunlight streams unevenly through the canopy. The moss beneath your feet is soft, slightly damp, offering gentle resistance as you move. You draw your bokken and practice a series of slow, deliberate swings, letting each stroke cut through the warm morning air. There's a fringe theory that Musashi's movements were sometimes performed as meditative exercises, almost ritualistic in cadence, blending practicality with mindfulness. You feel it now, your own rhythm merging with the rustling leaves, the distant calls of birds, the faint hum of insects, until movement and observation become inseparable. An old tree stands sentinel at the edge of the clearing, its gnarled branches twisting like arthritic fingers into the sky. You place a hand on its rough bark, feeling the living texture beneath your fingertips, and imagine the centuries it has witnessed. Perhaps a wandering samurai paused here once, or maybe it simply stood quietly, indifferent to human drama, yet observing and surviving, teaching silently through endurance. You consider how Musashi's philosophy often emphasized adaptability over rigid planning, flowing like water through circumstances rather than resisting them. It strikes you that this tree, with its patient endurance, mirrors the principle: stillness does not equal stagnation. Observation can be active in its own quiet way. Hours drift onward, and you find a small rise overlooking the valley below. The village now appears fully awake, smoke drifting lazily from chimneys, people moving with soft, deliberate purpose. You settle onto a flat rock, letting the warmth seep into your legs, and lift your bokken to practice another series of swings, watching how the morning light plays along its polished surface. You remember reading that Musashi often practiced at dawn, when the world was hushed, claiming that movement in quiet hours sharpened reflexes and focus. Scholars still argue whether these routines were purely martial or part of a broader spiritual discipline. Either way, you find the quiet rhythm of repetition calming, the physical exertion settling into your body like a gentle hum. A sudden breeze rustles the leaves above, carrying a faint floral scent from somewhere in the valley. You pause mid-swing, feeling the imperceptible shift in air, a reminder of how small forces can subtly alter balance and trajectory. You think about Musashi's battles, how minute shifts, an angle of approach, a hesitation, could determine victory or defeat. There is a certain thrill in observing these subtle movements in nature without the life or death stakes, as if the world itself offers endless training exercises for the mind and body. You probably won't survive a full-scale duel relying on such small observations alone, but right now, in this clearing, it feels enough. By midday, the sun is higher and the air carries warmth, the shadows shorter and softer. You take a brief rest, letting your arms dangle over your knees, and sip water from a small gourd. The taste is earthy, grounding, and you notice the faint tang of metal from the container, a reminder that even simple objects bear the traces of human effort. There's a fringe account that Musashi would occasionally test the sharpness of his mind and reflexes with riddles or strategic puzzles during such pauses, blending mental agility with physical preparation. You consider trying a few yourself, smiling at the absurdity of doing so while sitting on a rock in the forest, yet acknowledging the subtle sharpening it brings. Afternoon drifts slowly, and you continue your walk toward a distant ridge. The forest opens sporadically into meadows where wildflowers sway lazily, the wind threading through them with a soft rustle. You feel a gentle fatigue settling in your limbs, not unpleasant, but grounding, a reminder that practice is always accompanied by rest. You recall historical accounts of Musashi traveling extensively, sometimes sleeping outdoors under the stars, absorbing the world in all its sensory richness. Historians still argue whether his wandering lifestyle was driven by necessity, philosophy, or a combination of both. Either way, there's a lesson here. Adaptation is constant, and stillness can be a teacher just as much as motion. As the day begins to fade toward evening, you reach the ridge and look out over a landscape painted in soft amber light. The valley below, the winding river, the scattered villages, they all seem suspended in a quiet meditation. You set your bokken down once more, letting your hands rest on it, feeling its familiar weight, its history, and your own movement as one continuum. You notice the subtle textures in the air, the interplay of light and shadow, and the gentle whispers of wind across the ridge. There is a fringe suggestion that Musashi often used such moments to internalize lessons, reflecting silently on encounters, strategies, and the flow of life itself. You feel that reflection now, the quiet resonance of observation, patience, and measured movement echoing through your mind and body. Finally, you descend from the ridge as evening settles, shadows lengthening, the first stars peeking through a violet sky. You trudge slowly, savoring the day's gentle exertion, and feel a sense of satisfaction in both accomplishment and calm. You probably won't remember every detail of the morning, nor the precise angles of each swing, but the lessons, the rhythm of observation, the subtlety of timing, the quiet strength of patience linger like faint, comforting echoes. Tonight, you will rest with the satisfaction of having moved through the world as Miyamoto Musashi might, attentive, deliberate, and quietly alive. You wake to a soft drizzle, the kind that paints the air with a delicate mist and muffles the usual morning sounds. Your bedding is damp from the humidity, and you stretch slowly, feeling the slight chill crawl along your spine, a reminder that nature often sets its own tempo, whether you like it or not. You rise, slipping into your simple robes, and pick up your bokken, which feels heavier in this moist morning air. The weight is reassuring, a familiar companion amid the unpredictability of weather and wandering life. You probably won't survive a sudden ambush relying solely on calm breathing, but that doesn't matter right now. Today is about awareness, about learning from subtle shifts in the environment, and about moving in harmony with forces beyond your control. The path leads you through a bamboo grove, each stalk dripping with tiny beads of water. You pause to notice the rhythm of droplets hitting leaves, the faint scent of wet earth and decaying leaves blending into a natural perfume. Historians still argue whether Musashi's frequent journeys into such landscapes were merely tactical retreats or meditative exercises. Either way, you feel the quiet discipline embedded in each step you take. You move carefully, noting the slippery patches, the occasional broken branch, the way your boots imprint shallow grooves in the soaked soil. Even the simplest motions demand attention, teaching patience and presence in ways a formal duel never could. Further along, the grove opens onto a narrow bridge spanning a swollen creek. Water rushes beneath you, rushing yet patient, powerful yet predictable in its own quiet way. You hold your bokken lightly, testing balance and foot placement, imagining historical accounts of Musashi crossing treacherous terrain as part of his training. There's a fringe tale that he sometimes used precarious paths and unstable surfaces deliberately to sharpen reflexes and awareness, a kind of natural dojo where mistakes were softly corrected by gravity and momentum. You test each step deliberately, feeling the tension and release in your muscles, the soft sway of the bridge beneath your weight, and you realize that even small, careful movement is a form of practice. A sudden bird call draws your attention upward. A heron flaps lazily against the gray sky, wings cutting a rhythmic pattern as it glides above the water. You pause to watch, inhaling the damp air, noticing the faint metallic scent carried by the rain, the faint hum of insects still braving the drizzle. There's a historical note tucked somewhere that Musashi often studied the natural behavior of birds and fish, learning subtle lessons in timing and reaction. You probably won't become a master of archery by watching herons, but there's a kind of quiet enrichment in observing patterns, in noting movement, intention, and rhythm without imposing your own. The drizzle strengthens briefly, wetting your hair and the hem of your robe. You trudge along a muddy path, boots sinking slightly, feeling the resistance of the earth underfoot. You think of fringe accounts that Musashi occasionally trained barefoot to connect more directly with the terrain, absorbing information through pressure, balance, and texture. There's a strange satisfaction in imagining that, even if your own feet are shielded, your body still learns from subtle resistance. Scholars still argue whether barefoot practice was frequent or occasional, practical or symbolic. Either way, you can feel the connection between body, earth, and awareness strengthening with every cautious step. Eventually, you reach a small shrine nestled among moss-covered stones. Its wooden surface glistens with moisture, the roof streaked with water. You pause at the threshold, inhaling the faint incense lingering from the previous night, and feel the air settle around you like a soft blanket. There's a quiet lesson in observing reverence in the small things: the tilt of a roof beam, the careful placement of stones, the deliberate sweep of moss from the walkway. You recall stories suggesting that Musashi visited shrines often, not for ritualistic devotion alone, but to center himself, to recalibrate perception and intention. It's the sort of detail historians still debate, whether his visits were spiritual, tactical, or merely moments of reflective pause. You kneel briefly, bowing to no one in particular, letting the drizzle, the stone, and the quiet merge into a soft meditation. After leaving the shrine, you follow a forest path that climbs gradually. Each step requires attention, adjusting to loose stones and wet roots. The rhythm of movement, breath, and environment becomes meditative, a slow symphony of awareness. You notice tiny snails gliding along leaves, their slow persistence reminding you that patience is a skill, and endurance often lies in subtle, quiet movement rather than dramatic exertion. Fringe stories describe Musashi sometimes observing creatures for hours, learning timing and patience in ways that a duel could not teach. You probably won't adopt snail-like slowness in a fight, but today the lesson is in noticing, feeling, and moving deliberately. By midday, the rain has softened to a gentle mist. Sunlight breaks through the clouds and fragmented beams, catching droplets on leaves like scattered diamonds. You pause on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, breath slowing, chest rising and falling with a soft cadence. You draw your bokken once more and perform a series of deliberate, slow swings, the wet air clinging to each movement, adding subtle resistance. Scholars still argue whether Musashi's slow practice was a form of meditation or a method to improve precision under fatigue. Either way, your swings feel like water shaping stone, patient, persistent, and inevitably effective. As afternoon approaches, the forest thins, revealing a field of tall grass swaying in the wind. You trudge through it, each step a gentle negotiation with hidden roots and soft earth. You notice the way each blade bends and recovers, and you imagine that perhaps Musashi appreciated the resilience of grass in the face of storms, seeing metaphor and technique in natural phenomena. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes chose practice locations based on how subtly the terrain could challenge stability and balance. You step lightly, adjusting posture and movement instinctively, a slow dance of observation, correction, and patience. Evening approaches with muted colors, gray skies, darkened trees, and glistening leaves. You find a small stream and pause, letting your fingers trail in the cool water, feeling the current tug gently. There is a historical note that Musashi sometimes trained near water, letting its movement teach lessons in timing and adaptability. You probably won't master strategy from a stream, but there's a quiet serenity in letting it guide your awareness. Sitting on a damp stone, watching reflections ripple and distort, you feel the day's gentle exertion settle into your body. The world is softening into evening, and you can feel yourself aligning with its slower rhythm, muscles easing, mind quieting. Finally, you trudge back toward a humble shelter as dusk falls. The drizzle has stopped, leaving the air fragrant and cool. You feel the satisfaction of a day spent moving, observing, and integrating lessons from both nature and quiet practice. Your body carries a gentle fatigue, your mind a calm clarity. You notice the first stars peeking through a clearing in the clouds, tiny points of light that feel both distant and intimate. You probably won't memorize every detail of today's movements, yet the essence, the quiet presence, the attentiveness, the patience settles inside you, like a soft ember waiting to illuminate tomorrow's path. You wake to the faint aroma of smoked rice and brewing tea drifting through the air, a subtle reminder that even in wandering, human life continues its gentle rhythms. The morning feels lighter today, almost playful, with sunlight breaking through patches of clouds and illuminating dew-speckled grass like a field of tiny lanterns. You stretch slowly, feeling the ease of movement in your shoulders, hips, and knees, and take a deep breath of crisp air. The weight of your bokken on your back is familiar, comforting, almost like a warm handshake from an old friend. You probably won't survive a sudden clash with just your intuition, but that doesn't matter. Today is a day of observation, of refining motion, and of learning patience. Your path leads along a narrow forest trail, where moss creeps across stone walls and the occasional wildflower nods in the breeze. You pause to watch a small family of rabbits hopping among roots and underbrush, their alert movements quick and precise. You recall a historical note that Musashi often observed animals closely, studying how instinct shaped timing, balance, and reaction. There's a fringe story that he sometimes mimicked the movements of animals in practice, though historians still argue whether this was literal or more metaphorical. You decide it doesn't matter either way. The rabbit's careful, deliberate hopping teaches as much about awareness as any formal exercise. As the trail winds upward, you enter a denser patch of forest. Shafts of sunlight filter through the canopy, catching on spider webs in the corners of branches, turning them into delicate lacework glimmering with moisture. You pause, letting the quiet hum of the woods fill your senses. There's a fringe notion that Musashi often trained in isolation, not only for physical practice, but to heighten sensory awareness. Hearing the faintest movement, noticing the subtlest shift in air or light. You probably won't become a legendary swordsman simply by observing cobwebs, yet you feel your focus sharpening, your body and mind aligning in quiet readiness. Further along, the trail opens onto a small clearing where a lone cherry tree leans gracefully to one side. Its petals, tinged with early blossoms, flutter in the gentle wind. You set down your bokken and begin a slow sequence of practice swings, letting the movement mimic the natural arcs of branches and petals. There's a historical note tucked somewhere that Musashi appreciated seasonal cycles, seeing rhythm and nature as a model for timing and flow in combat. You watch a petal drift lazily to the ground, and think about how small, unnoticed forces, like air currents, gravity, or momentary hesitation, can shape the outcome of even deliberate action. Historians still debate how much Musashi consciously integrated such natural observation into his duels, but the principle feels relevant today. Subtlety is often more important than force. A gentle stream trickles nearby, its water cool and clear, snaking through moss-covered stones. You pause to let your fingers trace the current, noting the way it moves around obstacles without effort, bending, splitting, and rejoining in a quiet, persistent flow. Fringe tales suggest that Musashi saw water as a teacher, both in its adaptability and its inevitability, and you find yourself agreeing with the sentiment. Your bokken rests on a stone beside you as you sit, feeling the rhythm of your own breathing start to align with the soft gurgle of water. You probably won't outmaneuver a river in a fight, but you can learn how to move with the world rather than against it. The forest thickens again, and the trail narrows into a soft path of earth and pine needles. You notice the subtle resistance of each step as your boots sink slightly into the soft ground. There's a historical record that Musashi sometimes trained barefoot, letting the ground itself teach balance, posture, and pressure points. Scholars still argue whether this was practical, ritualistic, or symbolic, but the principle is clear. Connection to your environment enhances both awareness and performance. You adjust your stance with care, feeling subtle shifts in your feet, hips, and shoulders, letting each movement teach something quietly about alignment, center of gravity, and flow. A distant crow caws, cutting through the soft murmur of the forest, and you pause to note its flight, the sudden lift, and the way it adjusts mid-air. There's a fringe story that Musashi occasionally considered the flight patterns of birds when practicing timing and spacing, almost like a living drill for anticipating movement. You probably won't become a bird-like duelist, but the principle resonates. Movement is more than just muscle memory. It is observation, prediction, and adaptation. You resume practice, letting your swings echo the flow of wind through branches, the arc of falling petals, the subtle curves of the stream. By mid-morning, you reach a small ridge with a panoramic view of a valley below. Mist rises from the river like slow, curling smoke, and you take a moment to drink it in, inhaling the cool, damp air. You set your bokken down, allowing your hands to rest gently upon it, feeling its familiar grain and the weight of history. Historical accounts suggest Musashi often paused in elevated locations, reflecting on his surroundings and considering how terrain influenced strategy. Historians still argue whether such pauses were for tactical insight, meditation, or both. Either way, the act of watching, of absorbing, teaches a quiet vigilance that no duel alone could instill. You continue along the ridge, moving deliberately among scattered rocks and low shrubs. The wind picks up slightly, tugging at your robe and teasing the edges of your hair. You notice the subtle sway of each plant, the rhythm of the air, and the way your body responds instinctively to maintain balance. Fringe stories claim that Musashi sometimes trained in windy or unstable conditions to heighten sensitivity to external forces. You probably won't master all contingencies in a single session, but there is value in attuning to subtlety, letting perception guide motion instead of brute strength. As afternoon approaches, you descend gently toward the valley floor, the forest thinning into fields of tall grass. The movement is soft and unhurried, your body carrying the satisfaction of a morning spent observing, adjusting, and learning. Birds flit overhead, insects hum softly, and you pause to note the fleeting shadow of a hawk above. You remember a tale suggesting Musashi sometimes used such observations to sharpen reaction and awareness, letting natural patterns inform his instincts. You probably won't mimic a hawk midair, but you sense the lesson. Adaptability is grounded in attention, and mastery grows in quiet increments rather than dramatic gestures. By evening, the sky softens into shades of amber and rose. You trudge toward a small shelter, boots leaving shallow impressions in soft earth, and set your bokken aside to rest. The air is fragrant with the mixed scents of earth, moss, and distant cooking fires. You reflect on the day's subtle lessons: patience, observation, balance, and adaptability, quietly embedded in every movement and pause. Fringe accounts and scholarly debates can linger endlessly, but right now you feel the truth in the practice itself, in the gentle weaving of effort and awareness. You settle onto a mat, letting your body relax fully for the first time since dawn. You probably won't remember every detail tomorrow, yet the essence, the quiet calibration of body, mind, and environment remains, a soft ember glowing as night falls around you. You wake to a faint chill that carries the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. The morning light filters through the thin curtains of your shelter, painting soft, shifting patterns across the wooden floor. You stretch slowly, letting each vertebra articulate with a quiet creak that feels oddly satisfying. Your body is warm from yesterday's exertion, yet you feel the lingering awareness of muscles still learning, still adjusting. You pick up your bokken, its polished surface catching the early sun, and the weight feels like an old companion, familiar and steady. You probably won't survive a chaotic skirmish relying solely on calm reflection, but that doesn't matter. Today is another day of observation, slow practice, and learning from the subtle rhythms of the world around you. You step outside, and the path ahead is soft with fallen leaves damp from last night's rain. Each step releases a faint, earthy scent, and the ground feels slightly uneven beneath your sandals. A light breeze threads through the trees, carrying whispers of hidden movement, the rustle of small animals, and the distant hum of a village stirring to life. Historians still argue whether Musashi deliberately chose paths like this to heighten sensory awareness, or if it was simply the natural course of his wandering lifestyle. You don't need to resolve that debate. You simply let your attention settle on the subtle shifts around you, feeling the ground, the air, and your own body align in a quiet, deliberate rhythm. A brook appears along your route, its water clear and cool, gurgling over rounded stones. You pause to dip your fingers in, noting how the water flows effortlessly around obstacles, splitting and merging with patient grace. Fringe accounts suggest that Musashi sometimes trained near streams and rivers, letting the movement of water teach lessons in timing, adaptability, and subtle correction. You probably won't master strategy by watching a brook, yet there is something calming, almost instructive in its steady persistence. You trace the surface with your fingertips, feeling the tactile difference of each ripple and eddy, and let the gentle flow mirror your own breathing, steady, intentional, and measured. Continuing along the trail, you enter a denser forested area. The light here is dim, filtered through layers of green and brown, the canopy heavy with leaves. You notice the faint rustle of creatures moving through the underbrush, a rabbit, a bird, perhaps a fox skirting unseen. You stop, letting your eyes adjust and your senses heighten. Historians still argue whether Musashi's attentiveness to wildlife was tactical or meditative, but the principle remains. Awareness requires stillness and patience. You probably won't be able to anticipate every subtle shift in an opponent's movement, but training your attention in the quiet forest is a quiet, effective lesson. The path widens into a small clearing, dappled with sunlight and sprinkled with wildflowers. You set your bokken down and perform a series of slow, deliberate swings, letting your arms and torso guide the motion in harmony with the natural light and breeze. Fringe theories suggest that Musashi sometimes moved in tandem with natural rhythms, wind, sun, even the subtle vibration of the earth as a form of early biofeedback for combat readiness. You feel it now. Each movement aligns with the surrounding environment, effortless yet precise, a meditation disguised as practice. You pause mid-swing to watch a butterfly flutter through the clearing, noting its erratic yet controlled path, and realize that unpredictability can also be a teacher. Hours drift by as you continue, moving through patches of moss, stepping over fallen branches, and feeling the soft give of earth beneath your feet. You remember historical anecdotes of Musashi traveling barefoot at times to connect more intimately with the terrain, And while your own feet are protected, you sense the subtle lessons in each step: balance, pressure, and the quiet dialogue between body and environment. Scholars still debate the practical versus symbolic purpose of this practice, but for you, the effect is tangible, a sense of integration with the world beneath you, a grounding of movement and attention. A gentle wind stirs the leaves above, carrying the faint scent of wild herbs and distant hearths. You pause to inhale deeply, letting the mixture of aromas fill your lungs, and feel a slow, meditative calm settle over you. Fringe accounts suggest that Musashi occasionally used sensory experiences to enhance focus, sharpening awareness by noticing even subtle shifts in air, scent, or sound. You probably won't become a master strategist simply by smelling the forest, but integrating these small cues strengthens perception in ways that repetition alone cannot. You let the wind guide your movements through the clearing, each step measured, each swing deliberate, each pause filled with observation. As afternoon approaches, you find a small ridge overlooking the valley below. The view stretches for miles, a patchwork of fields, streams, and distant villages, all softened by haze. You set your bokken on the ground, letting your hands rest upon it, and watch the slow progression of shadows across the land. Historical records suggest Musashi often paused in high places to consider terrain, practice visualization, and reflect on strategies. Scholars still debate whether these pauses were primarily tactical or contemplative, but you find yourself agreeing with both interpretations. From this vantage point, the world moves according to its own rules, and you are learning to move in harmony with them rather than against them. You descend carefully, following a winding trail that cuts through tall grass and scattered rocks. Each step is deliberate, each movement measured, your body humming with the quiet satisfaction of mindful exertion. You notice insects flitting near your path, the swaying of grass responding to gentle gusts, and the distant murmur of a river. Fringe theories suggest that Musashi often integrated subtle environmental observation into his training, allowing small, often overlooked details to refine timing, balance, and reaction. You probably won't master a battlefield by watching grass bend, but the principle resonates. The world is a teacher if you allow it to be. By evening, the sun softens, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. You trudge toward a small, familiar shelter, your footsteps leaving shallow impressions in the earth. You pause to set down your bokken and breathe deeply, feeling your muscles relax and your mind settle. The day's exercises, observations, and reflections converge into a gentle rhythm, a quiet satisfaction that requires no external validation. You probably won't remember every detail, but the essence, the patience, awareness, and presence lingers like a soft ember, glowing steadily as night approaches. Night falls gently, and you lie down on the mat, letting the day's subtle lessons settle into your body. The distant chorus of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves become a lullaby, a gentle accompaniment to the satisfaction of a day spent learning without stress or drama. Fringe stories of Musashi's solitary travels, silent observations, and measured practice echo in your mind, a reminder that mastery is often invisible, slow, and deeply personal. You close your eyes with a calm smile, letting the quiet rhythm of body, mind, and environment carry you toward rest. You wake to the soft gray light of dawn filtering through thin clouds, the world muted and gentle, as if holding its breath. Your body feels a quiet fatigue from yesterday's practice, the kind that is deeply satisfying and lulls you into a sense of completeness. You stretch slowly, feeling the subtle awakening of each muscle, tendon, and joint, letting your movements be guided by comfort rather than urgency. Your bokken rests nearby, polished wood reflecting the pale light, a faithful companion that has witnessed countless days of quiet learning and reflection. You probably won't survive a sudden duel relying only on calm breathing, yet that is irrelevant this morning. Today, the rhythm of awareness, observation, and gentle movement is your teacher. Stepping outside, the world greets you with muted sounds. A distant crow caws, the whisper of wind through tall grass, and the faint trickle of a stream. Each step on the soft earth is deliberate, a gentle negotiation with roots, stones, and uneven soil. Historians still argue whether Musashi's solitary wanderings were purely for martial refinement or also for spiritual practice. But either way, the act of walking with attentiveness feels like a meditation in motion. Fringe tales suggest he sometimes challenged himself by navigating unfamiliar terrain barefoot, letting the ground communicate directly with his body. You imagine the subtle lessons each step offers: balance, patience, and the quiet dialogue between movement and environment. The morning mist clings to the leaves as you follow a narrow path through a dense grove. Sunlight breaks through sporadically, catching drops of water and turning them into tiny prisms. You pause, letting your senses drink in the delicate interplay of light, air, and moisture. Birds flit above, insects hum softly, and somewhere nearby, a fox rustles through underbrush. You probably won't learn every lesson nature offers in a single glance, yet the act of noticing, observing, and responding with subtlety teaches a depth of perception unmatched by any formal duel. Historical accounts suggest that Musashi often used these quiet, isolated moments to sharpen instincts, a principle still debated by scholars. Tactical necessity or contemplative ritual? Perhaps both. A small creek winds lazily along your path, its surface catching the fragmented sunlight. You kneel and trace your fingers through the cool water, noting the way it flows around obstacles, shaping itself without haste or resistance. Fringe stories claim that Musashi saw water as an ultimate teacher of adaptability, reflection, and persistence. You probably won't master every movement by mimicking its flow, yet each ripple, each subtle shift, mirrors principles of patience and timing that extend beyond combat. You rise, adjusting your stance, and perform a series of slow, deliberate swings with your bokken. The wet air adds slight resistance, and you feel your movements refine naturally, guided by both internal rhythm and external environment. The path opens onto a gentle rise, and you pause to look out over the valley below. Fields, rivers, and distant homes are bathed in the soft glow of morning light. You set your bokken on a rock and rest your hands upon it, feeling its smooth grain and familiar weight. Historians still debate whether Musashi considered such pauses strategic, meditative, or both. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes used elevated vantage points to observe patterns of life, movement, and strategy. You probably won't predict every outcome in the valley, yet the act of watching, listening, and feeling builds quiet insight, an attunement to rhythm, timing, and subtle cues. Continuing along the ridge, you navigate uneven rocks and soft patches of earth, each step a conversation between your body and the terrain. You notice the gentle sway of grass, the faint hum of insects, and the rustle of leaves above. Fringe tales suggest that Musashi often sought out such subtle, unstable conditions to refine balance and coordination, enhancing awareness without confrontation. You probably won't master every nuance of instability in a single day, but each deliberate movement teaches small truths about presence, anticipation, and adaptation. By afternoon, you descend toward a serene grove where sunlight filters in golden beams. You set your bokken aside to practice a final sequence of swings, letting motion flow from the core rather than the limbs. Each swing feels aligned with the air, earth, and gentle vibration of the surroundings. Historical notes indicate that Musashi's practice often incorporated environmental feedback, wind, uneven terrain, shifting light to sharpen instincts. Scholars still debate whether this was formalized training or intuitive habit, but today you feel the principle in every measured movement. Fringe accounts suggest that this practice sometimes extended for hours in silence, a method to hone focus and internal rhythm without external challenge. As evening approaches, the light softens to amber and violet hues, casting long shadows across the clearing. You pause, breathing slowly, letting your eyes follow the subtle play of light on leaves, rocks, and distant hills. You probably won't remember each detail tomorrow, yet the essence, The gentle integration of observation, movement, and awareness remains firmly planted in your body and mind. You gather your bokken, feeling its familiar weight, and trudge slowly toward your shelter, the world softening around you. The night settles in, bringing a cool hush and the distant chorus of crickets. You lay down on your mat, letting muscles relax fully and thoughts drift quietly. Fringe stories of Musashi's solitary wanderings, subtle observations, and disciplined yet meditative practice echo softly in your mind. Scholars still debate the balance between tactical necessity and contemplative refinement, but the essence transcends debate. Mastery often emerges quietly, imperceptibly, and gently, nurtured in patience and awareness rather than clamor and confrontation. You close your eyes with a contented sigh, letting the rhythm of body, mind, and world carry you toward rest. Slowly, your breathing lengthens, each exhale drawing away the subtle tension of the day. Muscles unwind, thoughts soften, and the lingering warmth of exertion fades into gentle calm. The faint hum of insects, the distant whisper of wind through trees, and the soft texture of the mat beneath you blend into a lullaby for body and mind. You probably won't recall every swing, every careful foot placement, or every moment of observation, but that is the beauty of quiet mastery. It settles into your being without fanfare, a silent companion for all the nights to come. The world dim around you, the shadows soften, and every small sound become a gentle rhythm guiding your mind into tranquility. The lessons of movement, observation, and awareness blend seamlessly into a soothing tapestry, each thread winding toward rest. The weight of your bokken, the subtle chill of evening air, the scent of earth and moss all merge into the quiet assurance of a life observed with care, patience, and deliberate presence. You probably won't survive every challenge in life as Musashi did, but in these moments, the essence of his practice, mindful attention, gentle strength, and quiet mastery sits lightly upon your shoulders, letting you drift into calm sleep. The day dissolves slowly into night, each sensation softening, each movement fading into stillness. Your body sinks deeper into the mat, muscles unspooling like threads pulled gently from a loom, leaving behind only warmth and relaxation. The distant whisper of wind through trees, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the faint hum of crickets create a soft, enveloping rhythm, a lullaby composed by the world itself. Each breath carries calm into your chest, each exhale releasing the subtle residue of exertion, leaving your mind clear, serene, and undisturbed. Your eyes trace the faint outlines of shadows against the walls, shifting with the night as if the world itself breathes softly around you. You probably won't remember every detail of the day's movements or observations, yet the essence remains, woven quietly into your being. Patience, presence, awareness, and gentle mastery. The weight of the bokken, the smell of earth, the soft touch of cool air on your skin, they settle into memory not as lessons to recall, but as sensations to carry, subtle guides for tomorrow. Let yourself drift further, deeper, allowing the boundaries between body, mind, and environment to soften. Every tiny sound, the ripple of distant water, the faint creak of a branch, the whisper of the wind, is a gentle reminder that you are part of a larger rhythm, a quiet symphony in which you move, breathe, and rest. Each thought slows, each sensation blends, and the world itself seems to sigh in gentle reassurance. You are safe. You are grounded. You are enough. Now, close your eyes fully. Let the quiet carry you, the gentle echo of movement and awareness settling into the soft hum of night. Drift slowly into sleep, where dreams may wander lightly or not at all, and the lessons of today linger as whispers, guiding you gently into rest. Sweet dreams!